You're on.
Okay, we're going to backtrack just a little bit. When we're talking about nebulizers and cleaning the tubing kits or the neb kits, I realized we did not talk about the humidifier bottle enough. So what we need to realize on this, the same thing with the nebulizer. This is going to be a wet, warm environment. Bacteria loves that, and it will grow in here like crazy. These are really, we do not put these on anybody. What's the liter flow that they usually have to be at? Remember? 4?
Over 4.
So they need to be 4 liters or greater before these are medically necessary. There's really not much medical benefit to having humidification on a patient that's under 4 liters. It doesn't pick up enough humidification to really help the nose that much. Having said that, however, there are some people who have been on oxygen for years and they've always used a humidifier bottle, and you will not convince them otherwise. So you'll need to talk to them about care and cleaning of these bottles. In 15 years, I think I've seen 2 or 3 people do this properly and consistently. Most people will never wash these, and they'll have just probably some of the nastiest stuff growing in these over time.
And they won't use distilled water either.
Right. The
water.
main thing that the most helpful thing is distilled water. It's cleaner. It has no calcium deposits in it, so you're not going to get hard water deposits in this. If they use tap water, you'll know it very quickly, because this whole thing will be scaled white, and eventually this tube that the water runs through, this tube will get built up and it will plug this up, and the humidifier bottle won't work, so they won't get their oxygen. So tap water is a no-no.
What if you have a water softener?
They still recommend using distilled water. It's cleaner.
Yeah.
So distilled water is always cleaner. Soft water would be better than regular tap water, I'll admit that, but it's not recommended because of the cleanliness factor. We did talk about this pop-off thing. If you've got too much pressure, this little chirp like a little bird when it pops off. They've designed these much better. Years ago, these would cross-thread very easily. They've made them to where they don't cross-thread as easy, but the most problematic thing you're going to get is somebody's going to get this off kilter a little bit, and it feels tight, but they've cross-threaded that, and all your oxygen's leaking out of here. But back to the cleaning and care of this. Distilled water is what goes in here. On every one it says refill at the bottom. There's a line here, if you can see that, and there's a max line here, if you can see that. Let me just bring it in there for you. Can you make that out?
Kinda.
If someone is sight impaired,
There's refill.
this is not going to help them much.
There's max.
Okay? This is not going to help them much. It's okay to take a marker and mark where that needs to be filled if you need to. That's fine. Because that is hard to see. If somebody's near blind, that's going to be impossible to see.
Oh yeah.
So when they fill this, educate them to fill just to the bottom of the line, not to the top of the line, because we talked about before is if they overfill this, water's going to spill over and get down in their tubing. So they fill it to the bottom of that line, and that should keep them safe. Some people will push it and try to get up to the top because they don't want to fill this up any more than they have to, and that's just the way it is. This amount here, depending on the liter flow, is only going to last them a few days. So they're going to be filling this twice a week, perhaps. But always use distilled water. The other thing to take in consideration when it gets to the refill line at the bottom, this is old water. It's been sitting there. It's probably been contaminated. So they need to take the old water, dump the old water out, wash this with warm soapy water, rinse it well, and fill it back up with distilled water. Put it back on the machine. The other thing they need to do is once a week, so this is going to be every other time they fill this usually, they need to take and do the same thing we did with the nebulizer kit. They need to take this in half water and half vinegar and put it in there and let it sit for a good 30 minutes. Then rinse it, let it air dry, and away you go. Now this brings up, how do they do that and have their oxygen still running? Because it's got to be sitting in there for 30 minutes. They need 2 bottles. So if you actually hook someone up to this, that's why before we said leave them an extra bottle, because they're going to have to go back and forth between these bottles when they're cleaning them and disinfecting. Over time, I would not use one of these for more than 30 days at a time, throw it away, put another one on. They're meant to be somewhat disposable. Problems with humidifier bottles, we talked about the cross-threading. Very common if someone calls you and says, I'm not getting my oxygen. It's bubbling in here, but I'm not getting my oxygen at the end. To verify that, I would have them first take their nasal cannula and have them take a small cup of water and dip it in that water. And if there's bubbles coming out, they're getting the oxygen. What happens, it's very similar to like if you're wearing a watch or a wedding band or something. After a while, your body just forgets it's there. So if they've been on oxygen, this is the first time they've been on oxygen, their body will acclimate to that within a few hours or days, and they'll be like, I don't feel it anymore. Where when you put it first on, if you should try this, put oxygen on yourself, and you'll notice it's inconvenient, and you really notice it, but after a while, your body gets used to it, and you forget it's even there. So they'll start to freak out a little bit. They're like, well, my oxygen's not running. Well, have you dipped it in a glass of water? And if they do that, it's bubbling, their body's just adapted to it and they don't notice it anymore. If there are no bubbles coming out, then the most likely culprit is this little thing being cross-threaded. It's either not tight or it's on there cross-threaded.
Or the threads up.
Or these threads, that's a good point. These threads here can come loose. If these are all tight, then the other problem could be is somebody's pulled the tubing and this thing's kind of been pulled out, and this will be cracked right along this piece here that attaches to the concentrator. That piece right there will be snapped, and there'll be a small crack in there, and it'll be leaking, and they won't be getting as much of their oxygen, if any, down this way. So you have to replace the whole bottle.
I had one the other day where the bottle had a split in it.
Down on the split here. Yeah, if there's any kind of, if it's compromised at all, then that oxygen's going to find a way out that rather than out this port to the oxygen. So these have got to be in good shape. And that, again, that's another reason why if you put someone on one of these, make sure they have an extra, because these things are not bulletproof. They'll break or wear out. So make sure that we're switching these out or giving them an extra when we're delivering. If they're 4 liters or below, try to talk them out of this. And the way that I talk them out of it, even if they've been on these for a long time, is I'll say, look, I don't mind if you use this, and you're okay to use it, but you've got to do certain things for me. You've got to use distilled water. Most of them know that. They'll be fine with that. Then I need you to dump the old water out and wash this between every fill. And then every other fill, at least once a week, I need you to take this apart and put it in vinegar water, a half vinegar, half water mix, and let it sit for 30 minutes. Most people have never done that, never heard of it, and they will look at you like, are you kidding me? I have to do that to have this little bottle. And you're like, and then at 2 liters, it really doesn't help you that much. A lot of people just take it off because they don't want to do that work. Or they'll use it and never clean it. And that's their prerogative. You've educated them, and they can do, it's their home, they can do what they want. If someone's on 2 liters or 3 or less, if their nose can't, some people can get really sensitive to the drying effects of oxygen. It can be pretty drying. Have them get some aloe vera gel, put it on a Q-tip, and swab their nose. If they can use KY jelly as well, it has to be something though that's water-based. This is Oxygen Safety 101. You cannot use petroleum-based products on an oxygen patient. Petroleum-based products, it's a fuel. And we add oxygen, it takes a small little spark to cause a fire. So this, we had some of these made up a long time ago. We have a few of these left. So if you have somebody that just can't get to the store, but they can go down and buy one of these at Walmart of aloe vera gel for like $2, and that thing will last them a year. They just put a little dab on a Q-tip, swab their nose. If they do that twice a day, that's probably going to be sufficient and a lot safer than a humidifier bottle that can get bacteria growing in it. So something to give them some hope that I am dry, here's a solution. But again, make sure it's not petroleum-based. Vaseline, mentholatum, Vicks, chapsticks, all those are off bounds, off limits. Because
Why is that?
It's a fuel. petroleum-based products. So we talk about the 3 parts of a fire. We'll talk about oxygen safety, but there's 3 parts for a fire. You have to have oxygen, you have to have a fuel, and you have to have heat. And we've put a lot of oxygen in the system just by the nature of them being on oxygen. Now we got to control the fuel and the heat sources. And if we add fuel, then all we can do is control the spark or the heat sources. What about static electricity? That's a spark. An electric shaver, it's got a spark in it. Hair dryers, got a spark. Anything electrical, it's going to have a spark or a heat source to it. So we need to keep fuels and spark and heat away from oxygen. So that's humidifier bottle in a nutshell.